everyone. My name is Hisham Ahmed, and I serve as an associate editor at the College of Pharmacy at King Saud bin Abdulaziz University for Health Sciences. And today I'll be sharing some valuable insights on how to prevent disk rejection when submitting your research manuscript from the perspective of the journal editors. Now, disk rejection can be an extremely frustrating obstacle for researchers, but with the right strategies, you can increase the chances of your manuscripts moving to the next stage of review. Ultimately, we will be discussing some common reasons for disk rejections, practical tips to avoid them, and best practices for manuscript preparation. Now, before we go ahead and get started, let's define disk rejection. So, disk rejection simply means the practice by the academic journals where the submitted manuscripts are rejected without being sent for peer review. Instead, the decision to reject the manuscript is made by the editorial team at the disk or within the editorial office itself. This is typically done when the submitted manuscript is deemed to be clearly unsuitable for publication based on the initial assessment. Now, I do have to clarify that I do have hold several positions as an associate editor for many biomedical journals. My expertise and insight on the subject matter are based on these editorial rules and stems from my relevant experience as a researcher and a primary investigator myself. So I'm the first person that you will be encountering whenever you submit your manuscript. And an associate editor, I have many duties. And the specific duties and responsibilities for any associate editors can vary widely depending on the nature of the publications or the organizations they work for. However, their primary goal is to help maintaining the quality and the integrity of the content and the publications they are associated with. Now, as a journal editor, I serve as a gateway for any publication, and my main responsibility is to decide which paper advances to peer review and which paper gets to be disrejected. Usually, few submitted manuscripts make their way to publications. And avoiding this rejection is the author first hurdle. And in this presentation, I describe why avoiding this rejection is so important, and I reveal some clues on how to increase your chances for your article to advance to peer review. Here's the outline for our presentation today. First, we will be reviewing the research project cycle. Then we will be outlining some of the common mistakes and errors that may lead to rejecting your manuscript. Then we will provide general tips and advices on how to get your manuscript advanced to peer review. So for the first goal or first outline for my presentation is basically highlighting the research project cycle. So the research project cycle after submission to journals typically follows a structured process. And here's an overview, a general overview of the steps involved in the research project cycle. Usually, it starts with the initial submission. The research project, including the manuscript, is submitted to the journal through an online submission system following the journal-specific submission guideline. Then the journal editorial team conduct an initial review to ensure that the submission complies with the journal guidelines, including formatting, length, and style. Then the editor may also assess the manuscript alignments with the journal focus and scope. Following this, if the manuscript passes through the initial disc review and it didn't get disc rejected, it gets to be sent out for peer review. The editor selects one or more peer reviewers with expertise in the subject matter, and the reviewers evaluate the manuscript for its quality, originality, methodology, results, and overall contribution to the field. Usually, the reviewers provide feedbacks and comments and recommendation whether to accept, revise, or reject the manuscript based on their assessment. Following this, based on the feedback received from the peer reviewers and the editors, author makes revisions to the manuscript and address the concerns, clarify points, and improve the overall quality of their works. Usually, the authors submit a revised manuscript along with the response letter, detailing how they address the reviewers' comments. Following this, the editor gets to decide. The editor reviews the revised manuscript and the author response letter. Based on this, the editor makes a decision regarding the manuscript acceptance, revision, or rejections. Throughout this process, effective communication between authors, reviewers, and journal editorial team is essential to ensure the smooth and successful publication experience. The timeline for each of these steps can vary widely, depending on the journal policies, the complexity of the research, and the availability of the peer reviewers. Now, I think that the research project cycle doesn't start with submitting your manuscript. I think the pre-submission phase in the research project cycle is a crucial stage that demands careful planning and effort. This phase encompasses activities that occurs before the actual submission of the research manuscript to the journal or any conference or whatsoever. And I'll try to outline and reflect on the needed pre-submission effort in the research project cycle. First of all, the literature review. You need to invest time in systematically reviewing the relevant literatures and ensuring your research addressing the existing gaps and extends the current knowledge. Following this, you need to plan and document your research design, sampling strategies, data collection methods, statistical analysis plan in detail. Also, you need to develop a data collection tools, conducting a pilot study sometimes, and preparing for data analysis, considering statistical techniques or software that are needed to conduct your analysis. Also, you need to take into consideration the ethical aspect, in which you need to seek ethical approval, obtaining informed consent from participants, and implement strategies to protect confidentiality and privacy. And ultimately, as a wrap up, you start with writing and your manuscript, and you start preparing your manuscript for submission. You need to develop a writing schedule, create outlines, and start drafting sections of your manuscript as your research progresses. You also need to select your journal carefully. You need to read their previous publication and understand their submission guidelines before finalizing your manuscript. And you need to ensure that you have a pre-submission review for your manuscript. You need to seek feedback from your mentors, colleagues, and professional editors to refine your manuscript and ensure clarity and coherence. Finally, you need to format and cite whatever relevant work that has been referenced in your manuscript appropriately, and you need to ensure that your manuscript adheres to the specific formatting and citation styles required by the target journals. As I mentioned, the pre-submission effort is an investment in the overall quality of the success of your research. I think thoughtful planning, attention to detail, collaboration contribute to robust research project that stands better chance for being accepted for publication ultimately. Now, moving to the second outline for our presentation today, I will try to shed some light on outlining the most common mistakes that may lead to rejection of the manuscript, and specifically the disk rejection. Now, in my experience, there are two main or common variants for any type of rejection at the desk. Usually, one variant is that the topic is extremely broader than our readership is interested in. Such paper may be better suited to public health journals, for example, and I try as much as possible to redirect the authors for these manuscripts. The opposite variant, on the other hand, is that the paper is extremely narrow for our readership. And in the rejection letter, as I mentioned, I tend to redirect such papers to more appropriate journals. So these are the most common, in my opinion, reasons or variants for disk rejections that I've encountered throughout my journey as an associate editor. Of course, there are other reasons, and I will try as much as possible in the next few slides to shed some light on the specific mistakes, pitfalls, or errors that may lead to rejection of the manuscript based on the designated section of your manuscript. First off, the general section, the general aspect of your manuscript. Not adhering to the instructions to the authors of the particular journal is a common error that can lead to the rejection of any manuscripts in academic publishing. As I mentioned previously, most academic journals have specific guidelines and instructions for authors that outlines the formatting, structure, and style requirement for submitted manuscript. I believe that failing to follow these instructions can result in rejection for several reasons. First of all, incompatibility with the journal standards. Usually, journals have established standards and formatting requirements to ensure consistency and readability across their publication. I believe that failing to adhering to these standards can make the manuscripts incompatible with the journal style. The second reason is the unreadable or disorganized manuscripts. Usually, journals have specific requirements for how manuscripts should be structured, including sections like abstracts, methods, results, references. I think disregarding these requirements can lead to a disorganized and unreadable manuscripts. The third reason for rejecting manuscripts from the general appearance is basically the violation of the length restrictions. I've encountered many manuscripts that has been rejected because of violation of length restrictions, and many journals have word limits or page limits for any articles. Exceeding these limits can result in rejection. I think you need to, and also on the other hand, submitting an overly brief or incomplete manuscript can also be problematic and may lead to rejection as well. So you need to ensure that you're following the instructions that are provided for you as an author in the website of these journals. The fourth reason is the improper citation and references. I think proper citation and references are crucial in academic writing. Failure to follow the journal-specific citation, whether it's an APA or MLA or Vancouver size, whatever it is, or to accurately cite sources can result in a rejection due to issues within the scholar integrity. The fifth reason is the ethical and authorship concerns. I think not adhering to ethical standards such as plagiarisms issues related to authorships or conflict of interest may lead to rejections. Um, the sixth issue that I usually encounter in the general appearance of any manuscript is the failure to include required elements. Usually, journals may require specific elements such as structured abstracts, a conflict of interest statement, data sharing statement, or supplementary materials. Omitting any of these required components may lead to rejection. Finally, I think language and grammar issues possess an extremely important aspect to be taken into consideration whenever you draft any manuscript. Manuscripts with significant language or grammar issues, especially if they are not in the journal's primary language, can be rejected. It's important to have manuscript professionally edited if necessary. Now, moving to the abstract section, I think the pitfall of the abstract does not correctly or accurately represent the main text, especially after submission of a revision, pertains to issues related to the abstract of the manuscript, particularly when the abstract fails to effectively summarize the content of the main text. This issue can lead to rejection of manuscript for several reasons. First of all, misleading information. If the abstract is often the first part of the manuscript that reviewers and editors gets to read. If the abstract does not provide an accurate representation of the research or the results presented in the main text, it can mislead the readers and the reviewers, and this might create a negative impression of the manuscript. The second reason is the loss of clarity. I think a well-written abstract should be clear, concise, and informative. If the abstract does not accurately reflect the content of the main text, it can create confusion and make it challenging for the readers and the reviewers to understand the manuscript's purposes and the main findings. The third reason is the reviewer frustration, and I've encountered this myself as a reviewer. Usually, reviewers may become frustrated if they find the abstract contradict or diverge significantly from the content of the main text. This frustration can lead to negative review, as reviewers may question the manuscript integrity or the author's understanding of their own research. The fourth reason, I think, is the inconsistencies in revision. This issue can become even more critical during the revision process. If the author are asked to make changes to the main text based on the reviewer feedback and do not update the abstract section to reflect these changes, the abstract may become outdated or inaccurate, which can lead to confusions among the reviewers and editors. The fifth reason is the loss of interest. I think this is a phenomenon in which a misleading or inaccurate abstract can lead to a loss of interest from the potential readers. Usually, journal editors want to ensure that the abstract effectively communicates the manuscript significance and findings, and poor abstract can deter the readers from exploring the full paper. Now, moving to the introduction section, I think not mentioning the research question clearly is a critical error that can lead to the rejection of any manuscript, especially in the context of academic publishing. Now, when submitting a research paper, articles, or scholarly manuscripts, it's essential to articulate the research question or objectives clearly and effectively. Failing to do so can result in rejection of your manuscript for several reasons. The first reason is basically the lack of focus. Usually, a well-defined research question provides the central focus of the study. Without a clear research question, the manuscript may lack the sense of purpose and direction, this make it difficult for the readers and the reviewers to understand the study's primary aim. The second reason is the unclear purpose. I think without a clear research question, it may be challenging to determine the purpose or the significance of your research. This can lead to confusion about why the study was conducted and what was the aim to be achieved in the study. The third reason is basically the inadequate context. Now, a research question often sets the context for the study. Failing to mention it clearly can result in insufficient background information, and it make it hard and difficult for the readers to understand the research relevance and significance. The fourth reason is basically the ambiguity. The vague or unclear research question can lead to ambiguity throughout the manuscript. Usually, reviewers and readers may struggle to discern the precise scope and objectives of the study, which can be extremely frustrating and may lead to rejection. The fifth reason is basically the difficulty in evaluation. Usually, reviewers and editors need a clear research question to evaluate the manuscript's methodology and its alignment with the research objectives. If the research question is not stated clearly, it's going to be extremely challenging for us to assess the study quality. Finally, I think the lack of hypothesis or research objective. In many cases, research questions is followed by specific hypotheses or research objectives. I think failing to articulate the research question may result in a lack of these crucial components, which are important for guiding the research and the analysis ultimately. Now, moving to the method section, I think not mentioning the details of the ethic clearance is extremely essential in evaluating any manuscript and may lead to the rejection of any manuscript. I think the ethical consideration are paramount in the research, and failing to mention the approval from institutional ethic committees can be a serious lapse, and you have to take this seriously into consideration. The second problem that I often encounter in so many manuscripts is that the method section um, is too elaborative or too short to provide description of the methods. Usually, the method section needs to strike a balance between providing sufficient details for reproducibility and conciseness for readability, and being overly detailed or too brief can be extremely detrimental. I think and also the third issue that I would like to highlight is the improper sampling or improper subject selection. I think as a problem, the choice for the participant or subjects in a study is critical. If the sample is not representative or the selection criteria are inappropriate, the study validity will be extremely compromised, which might affect the decision whether to just reject it or to send it to peer review. These errors can lead to the rejection of manuscript, as I mentioned, because of they undermine the scientific rigors, transparency, and ethical standards of the research. I think peer reviewers and editors assess whenever they assess these aspects carefully to ensure the published research is of the highest quality and adheres to the ethical guidelines. Usually, authors should be extremely meticulous in addressing these issues in the method section to enhance the overall credibility of their research. Now, moving to the results section, I think to a great extent, omitting important results is one of the major reasons why papers get to be rejected at the desk. As a problem, the results section should present all relevant findings to allow readers to fully understand the study outcomes. And omitting key results may lead to biased or incomplete interpretation of the results. The second problem that I usually encounter is the emphasis on trivial or less important findings. As a problem, the results section should prioritize the most significant and relevant findings. And overemphasizing trivial or less important results can dilute the impact of your study. The third reason that I encounter as a reason for rejecting a lot of manuscripts is not mentioning the 95% confidence intervals along with the p-values, odds ratio, or whenever they're indicated. As a problem, I think confidence intervals provide ranges of values that helps to interpret the precision of your estimates. Failing to report them alongside p-values or odds ratio can lead to incomplete understanding of the statistical significance of your result. The fourth problem that I usually encounter is usually using a wrong statistical analysis. As a problem, incorrect statistical methods or analysis can compromise the validity and reliability of the study findings. Using inappropriate statistical tests may lead to inaccurate conclusion, and you don't want to extrapolate the results of your manuscript to the population or to our practices if you're using inappropriate statistical tests that led to inaccurate conclusion. I think addressing these issues in the results section is extremely crucial for ensuring the accuracy, transparency, and interpretability of your research finding. I need to make sure that I am able to interpret your results and your research findings. Thorough and accurate reporting is essential for the peer review process and contribute to the overall quality of your manuscript. Now, moving to the discussion section, one of the major pitfalls that I encounter is not being able to focus on discussing the findings of the author's own study. As a problem, the discussion should primarily focus on interpreting and contextualizing the results of the present study. Usually, failing to do so may indicate a lack of engagement with the study outcomes. And as a solution, you need to keep the discussion centered on the study finding, provide detailed explanation and interpretation of the results in the context of the research questions or hypothesis. The second reason that or the second pitfall or mistakes that I encounter in the discussion section is basically the inadequate interpretation of the results. Usually, superficial or incomplete interpretation of results hinders the depth of understanding for both readers and reviewers. The third issue is basically the incomplete comparison of the author results with relevant other result studies or and as a problem, usually failing to compare and contrast the study results with existing literature can limit the context and the significance of your findings. The following issue that I usually encounter is that you're not able to highlight clearly what information is new to the present study. And as a problem, if the discussion does not clearly articulate what the study contributes that is novel or distinctive, the manuscript may lack compelling rationale for publication. The following issue that I usually encounter is basically failing to mention the strength and limitation of your study. And as a problem, an omission of the study strength and limitation reduces the credibility and completeness of your manuscript, and you have to include these things in your manuscript, no matter what. Now, looking into the conclusion, usually the major issue that I encounter in the conclusion is not being able for your conclusion to be supported by the study finding. And as a problem, usually conclusions should be drawn directly from the study results. And if there is a disconnect between the conclusion and the finding, it undermines the integrity of your research. And not being able to clearly summarizing the key messages of your study are extremely uh, essential and usually hinders the acceptance or the decision for us to proceed with your manuscript for peer review. And failing to provide clear summary of your study key messages may leave readers without a concise understanding of the main takeaways. Now, addressing these issues in the discussion and the conclusion section is essential for presenting a comprehensive and well supported interpretation of the study results. It enhances the overall quality and impact of your manuscript. Now, I hope I was able to highlight some of the common mistakes that may lead to rejecting your manuscript. Now, how can we overcome these things? What are the general tips and advices that I have for you today in order to get your manuscript published and ultimately proceed from the peer review ultimately to get in order to be accepted? The first tip that I have for you is that you have to be patient, and I cannot emphasize this enough. Being patient is crucial virtue in the field of medical research, and it involves a complex and often time-consuming process. And here are several aspects why I believe patience is essential in the context of medical research. Usually in the study design and protocol development, crafting a robust study design and developing a well-defined research protocol is a meticulous process. It requires careful consideration of variables, ethical consideration, methodological details, patience. Patience is necessary to ensure that the study is well designed, ethically sound, and capable of producing meaningful results. The second thing that you have to take into consideration when it comes to patience is patients with recruitment and retention. Now, enrolling participant in clinical studies, clinical trials, or whatsoever can be time consuming. Researchers needs to be patiently navigate the recruitment process, considering inclusion and exclusion criteria, obtaining informed consent, and addressing any concerns potential participant may have. Moreover, retaining participants throughout the study duration required ongoing patient and communication. Now, moving into the data collection and analysis, I think collecting data, especially in the longitudinal study or clinical trials, can span months or even years. Now, researchers must have exercise patience during these phases to ensure that the collection of accurate and reliable data are um, is achieved. Additionally, I think the subsequent data analysis and interpretation require meticulous attention to details, with patience needed to navigate the complexity of statistical analysis and draw valid conclusions from these analyses. Following this, you need to be patient with the literature review and background research. I think conducting a thorough literature review is a fundamental step in medical research. This involves patience in searching and synthesizing a vast body of existence of knowledge. Patience is extremely necessary to ensure the comprehensiveness and the understanding of the existing literature, identifying research gaps, and position the new study within the context of previous work. Now, once you hit the submission button, you're looking into the peer review and the publication process. Once you submit your manuscript to any scientific journals, it involves by default a peer review process that can be time consuming. Now, as a researcher, you have to patiently wait for the feedback from the reviewers, which may include revisions and further data analysis. Additionally, the publication process itself can take time, from acceptance to final publication. Usually, patience is extremely crucial during these stages to maintain the quality and the integrity of your research. Now, also, you need to be patient with navigating the regulatory process. In medical research, usually, especially in the critical clinical trials, researchers often need to navigate complex regulatory processes and obtain approval from ethic committees and regulatory bodies. This process can be extremely time consuming, and patient is extremely necessary to ensure the compliance with all regulatory requirements. Following this, adapting to unexpected challenges. You need to be extremely patient with this. Research rarely proceeds without obstacles, without whether it's unexpected results, equipment failures, or change in the research team. Being patient and adaptable is extremely essential throughout this process. Researchers need to approach challenges with resilience, troubleshooting effectively, and maintaining the integrity of their study. Now, the following or the final thing to be patient about is basically translating your research to practice. I think translating research to findings into practical applications or interventions often take times. Patience is extremely required to navigate these complexities of implementation, dissemination, and adoption into clinical practice. In conclusion to this part in particular, I think being patient in medical research is not only about enduring the duration of the study, but also about the maintaining the meticulous and thoughtful approach at every stage. It's about recognizing meaningful research the meaningful research take times, dedication, and commitments to scientific rigors. The second tip that I have for you is that there's no magic stick to conduct research. And the statement that there is no magic stick and you need to invest in yourself and in your team, I think it underscores the reality that success in medical research requires deliberate effort, continuous learning, and collaboration within a dedicated team. And Let me elaborate a little bit on this concept. Usually, continuous learning and skill development is extremely required whenever you are planning to conduct any research. Medical research is a dynamic field with an evolving methodologies, technologies, and knowledge. Usually, researchers must invest time and effort in staying abreast of the least advancements, attending conferences, practicing or participating in workshop, engaging in continuous education. This commitment to learn ensures that the research team is equipped with the most current and relevant skills. The second thing that I would like to shed some light on is basically the resource allocation and infrastructure. Usually, successful medical research demand investment in resources such as state-of-the-art equipments, lab facilities, and access to databases or registries. Adequate funding is essential to support these resources. Researchers and institutions need to proactively seek grants, collaborate with funding agency, and strategically allocate resources to facilitate high quality research. The third thing actually that I would like to elaborate on is basically the team building and collaboration. Usually, research is seldom a solo endeavor. It's investing in a skilled and collaborative team is extremely crucial. This involves recruiting individuals with diverse expertise, fostering a culture of open communication, promoting teamwork. Usually, collaboration within and outside the institution enhance the collective knowledge and capabilities of your team. The fourth thing that I would like to highlight is basically the professional development and mentorship. Usually, researchers, especially early career scientists, benefit from mentorship and guidance. I think investing in mentorship programs and creating opportunities for professional development helps individual growth in their roles. And I believe is that establishing a culture of mentorship within the research team contributes to the supportive and nurturing environment. The fifth thing that I would like to elaborate on is basically the ethical and regulatory compliance. Compliance with ethical standards and regulatory requirements is not negotiable in medical research. Researchers must invest time in understanding and adhering to ethical guidelines, obtaining necessary approvals, and ensuring that the research is conducted with the utmost integrity. I think this investment safeguards the credibility and the reputation of the research team and the institution at large. The sixth thing that I would like to elaborate on is basically the data management and analysis. And as an elaboration on this, basically with the increasing emphasis on big data and advanced analytics in medical research, investing in robust data management and analysis infrastructure is extremely essential. This includes training team members in data handling, statistical analysis, and interpretation. I think reliable data management practices contribute to the validity and reproducibility of research findings. I think, in summary to this point, the absence of magic stick emphasizes the success of medical research is not based on shortcuts or quick fixes. Instead, it requires ongoing investment in knowledge, infrastructure, collaboration, and ethical practices. I think by prioritizing these investments, researchers and their team create a solid foundation for meaningful and impactful contribution to the field. The following tip is basically that I have for you is basically you need to see what other similar papers have done. And I take the phrase to see other similar papers, how they did, underscores the importance of conducting a thorough literature review as a fundamental step in the process of medical research. And here's an elaboration for you to understand this concept. First of all, you need to extensively identify the existing knowledge. And as an elaboration on this, I think before embarking on a new research study, it is extremely essential to understand the existing body of knowledge in the field. By reviewing similar papers, researchers can identify what has already been investigated, the methodologies employed, and the findings obtained in these research findings. I think this process helps in building a foundation of knowledge and ensures that the new study contributes meaningfully to the existing literature. The second thing is basically why you need to look on the other similar papers. Basically, you need to identify the gaps in these research findings. And As an elaboration into this, I think analyzing similar papers enable us as researchers to identify gaps or limitation in the current understanding of particular topics. I think recognizing these gaps is extremely crucial as it informs the formulation of research questions and hypotheses for the new study. This step, I think it ensures that the research is not duplicative, but addresses unanswered questions or builds upon existing knowledge. The third aspect in which you need to look over the other similar papers is basically looking into the methodological insights. I think reviewing similar papers provide valuable insights into various research methodologies and study design that have been used in the past. And I think researchers can evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of different approaches, and this ultimately might help them make informed decisions about the most suitable methodologies for their own studies. I think learning from the previous experiences of the others can enhance the robustness of your new research. The fourth thing is basically the data analysis strategies. I think understanding how similar studies approach data analysis, including the statistical methods employed, helps researchers in planning their own data analysis strategies. I think also it provides benchmark for statistical significance, effect size, and other relevant metrics. This knowledge contributes to the rigor and the validity of the new study findings. The following thing is basically how you interpret these results findings. I think examining how other research findings interpreted their results in similar studies offer a framework for our understanding and discussing our findings. It helps us as researchers anticipate potential challenges, alternative explanation, or unexpected outcomes. It also allows us for more nuanced interpretation for our own results. The following thing is basically the publication standards and norms. And as an elaboration on this, I think by exploring similar papers that have been published in reputable journals, researchers gain insights into the standards and expectation of the academic community. I think understanding the style, the structure, the formatting helps in preparation the manuscript that aligns with the norms of the scholarly publishing in this particular field. The following aspect is avoiding redundancy. You don't want to be redundant or duplicating the previous work. And I think awareness of existing literature helps researchers avoid redundancy. If a similar study has recently been conducted, researchers can assess whether there's a need for replication, or if there should be a need to explore a different angle, population, or methodology. This ultimately might prevent the duplication of the effort and resources. So, in essence, I think the directive to see what other similar papers did, I think it emphasizes the importance of learning from the collective knowledge and experiences of the scientific community. I think also it promotes a research approach that is informed, strategic, and positioned to make meaningful contribution to the advancement of the medical field. The fourth tip that I have for you is that basically you need to put yourself in my shoes. As an associate editor, you need to ask yourself, what do I look for in any manuscript? There's a lot of things that goes into this discussion, but when considering the perspective of putting yourself in the editor's shoes during medical research, it involves adopting the mindset of an individual responsible for assessing the quality, the relevance, and overall suitability of a manuscript for publication. And I'll give you an elaboration on this aspect. Basically, you need to put yourself on my shoes and evaluate the originality and the significance of your manuscript. What does that mean? Usually, editors are tasked with ensuring that the research is that is presented in the manuscript is original and contributes significantly to the existing body of knowledge. As a researcher, considering this perspective involves critically evaluating whether your study introduces novel insights, addresses relevant research gaps, or offer a fresh perspective on a particular issue. The second thing that I want you to think about whenever you put yourself in my shoes is basically adhering to the journal scope and guidelines. And as an elaboration, usually editors must ensure that the submitted manuscript aligns with the scope and guidelines of the journal. Again, putting yourself in the editor's shoes means assessing whether your research fits the journal focus, audience, preferred writing style. It involves tailoring your manuscript to meet the specific requirement outlined by the publications or by the journal itself. The third thing is basically the clarity and the transparency in reporting your findings. And editors prioritize clear and transparent reporting to facilitate understanding and reproducibility. So, considering this perspective means reviewing your manuscript to ensure that the research methods, results, and conclusion are presented in a clear, concise, and logically structured manner. It involves anticipating and addressing potential questions or concerns that the editors or the reviewers may have. The fourth thing that I want you to take into consideration whenever you put yourself in my shoes, usually us as editors are vigilant about ethical standards and scientific rigors of the research. Putting yourself in the editor's shoes involves conducting a thorough self-assessment of your study adherence to ethical guidelines, including proper informed consent, appropriate statistical analysis, and transparent reporting of potential conflicts of interest. Now, collectively, there are many other things, but I think by adopting the perspective of the editors throughout the research process, I think you as a researcher may enhance the quality and the suitability of your manuscripts for publication. This approach, I think, involves the critical self-assessment that aligns with the expectation and the standards set by the reputable scientific journals. Now, the fifth tip that I have for you is basically you might ask 10 different researchers about how to structure your manuscript, and you're probably going to get 10 different answers. And ultimately, the 10 answers that you might get from these 10 different researchers might be also correct. And what does that mean? What that phrase usually mean? The phrase you might ask 10 different researchers and you might get 10 different answers, and yet they are all correct, underscores the inherent complexity and diversity in the field of medical research. And let me elaborate on this for you to get to understand it. Usually, medical research encompasses a vast array of disciplines, methodologies, and research questions. Different researchers may approach a problem or a question from various perspectives based on their expertise, background, and specific context of their research. I think this diversity can lead to a multitude or valid and correct answers to the same question. The second thing is basically the methodological variances. Usually, researchers often employs different methodologies and study design to investigate similar research questions. The choice of methods can vary based on the fact that such available resources, the nature of the research questions, and the population under study. I think consequently, researcher may obtain valid results using different approaches, basically. The following thing is basically interpretation of results. Now, even when researchers use similar methodologies, the interpretation of results can vary. Now, researchers may emphasize different aspects of the findings based on their individual expertise, interests, or broader context of their research. I think these varied interpretation can lead to different answers while still being valid within the specific context that's being investigated. The other thing that I would like to elaborate on based on this aspect is that researchers often have a distinct priorities and research agenda shaped by their individual background, institution affiliations, and personal interests. And as a result, their research may focus on different aspects of a broader topic, leading to a varied answer that aligns with the specific research goals. Now, collectively, in conclusion, this phrase basically highlights the richness and complexity inherent in the medical research. I think it emphasizes that the diversity of answers obtained by different researchers is not indicative of inaccuracies, but rather reflects the multifaceted nature of this field. I think recognizing and appreciating this diversity contributes to a more comprehensive understanding of a complex medical phenomenon. Now, I have other tips for you in structuring your manuscript, and we all know the typical structure for any manuscript. Usually, any manuscript contain many sections, and each one of them has a defined purpose. And at the beginning of any manuscript, there is the title, the abstract, and the keyword. Then you get into the main text of your article or your research, which includes the introduction, the methods, and the results, and the discussion section. This is basically where you must present your work and convey the main messages and findings effectively. Usually, readers' time is not unlimited to. You need to make sure that your article is as concise as possible, but also elaborative enough to provide the point that you want to deliver from your manuscript. The last group of section is basically at the end of the manuscript, and this includes the conclusion, the acknowledgement, and the reference and the supporting materials. And uh, this general structure should give you a feel for a typical structure, but do note that some journals request a different order. For instance, the discussion section might be combined with the conclusion section or the results section, while other require different or additional sections. For example, um, some journals might request the R&D section to be combined altogether. So you should read the guide for author for the specific criteria of your target journal. Now, in the next couple of slides, I'll try to shed some light on some certain specific tips on how to enhance these sections. So, in order to enhance the title of your manuscript and reduce the risk of disk rejection in particular, you need to consider these brief recommendations, in my opinion. First of all, the clarity. I think you need to ensure that the title is extremely clear and easy to be understood. Specificity. I think you need to be also specific about the main focus of your research. I think you also need to include relevant keywords for your manuscript to be discoverable. You need to take into consideration the aspect of conciseness, in which you need to keep the title reasonably concise, but at the same time, it has to be descriptive, in which the title has to describe the main topics or the research question. You need to use active voice whenever possible and try as much as possible to eliminate unnecessary words, such as removing unnecessary articles or conjunctions. It has to be extremely unique. You need to ensure that the title is distinct and unique and reflect the scope of your research questions. And you need to make sure that the title actually reflects the research scope. You need to revise it. You need to make sure that you review it several times and refine the title in order to improve its effectiveness. It never harms you to seek feedback. You need to get input from colleagues and peers. You need also, by the end of the day, to follow the general guidelines. You need to check for the specific journal title requirement. I think by the end of the day, these are general tips for your title, and I think well-crafted title can improve the chances of your manuscript being accepted for publication ultimately. Now, moving to the following section, which is the introduction section of your manuscript, I try to provide some insights in order to enhance the introduction section of your manuscript and increase its likelihood for it to be accepted and proceed to the peer review or ultimately gets accepted. I think you need to start with the hook as uh, at the beginning of the introduction with an engaging hook that you know capture the reader's interest. This could be a thought-provoking question or a surprising fact or a relevant anecdote or a compelling quote or this gives a strong opening, can draw readers into your study, and I think it's extremely essential in introduction. You need to clearly state the research question. And again, I mentioned this previously, and in the opening paragraph, explicitly state your research question or the primary objective of your study. I think you need to make it clear, specific, and focused. This sets the tone for the rest of your paper, in my opinion. You need to provide context and background. Usually, you need to offer a concise review of the relevant literature and provide necessary context of your research. You need to also explain why your research is extremely important and how it builds upon existing knowledge. You need to highlight gaps, controversies, and areas where more research is needed. And this is why you're doing your research, and this is why you're justifying conducting your research. You need to explain the significance of your research based on the gaps that you were able to identify. You need to state why it's relevant to the field, what the real world problem does, does address, what are the potential implication and contribution of your studies. You need to clearly articulate why your research matters. Following this, I think you need to outline the structure. And this means basically to provide a brief overview of the manuscript structure. This can help readers navigate your papers, mentioning the section that will follows, such as the method, results, discussion, might give readers a roadmap for what to expect in the upcoming section. You need to be concise as much as possible. While it's important to provide context, avoid lengthy discussion in the introduction. It is extremely essential. You need to save detailed literature review and complex explanation for the appropriate section later in the manuscript. And here I'm talking particularly about the discussion section. You need to use clear language. I think you need to write in a clear and straightforward language, and you need to avoid unnecessary jargon, and you need to make your introduction accessible to a broad academic audience. You need to also develop a logical flow. And this means basically that you need to ensure that the information in the introduction flows logically. Each point should naturally lead to the next. Avoiding abrupt shifts in the topic or overly detailed tangent is extremely essential whenever you draft your introduction. Cite, citing relevant resources. I think this is extremely essential because you need to properly cite the sources you reference in the introduction. I think accurate citation demonstrate your understanding of the field and build credibility for the reviewers and the editors. You need to also be specific. You need to avoid vague and overly general statement. Instead, you have to be specific in your descriptions and explanation. If you make claims or assertions, you need to provide evidence or context to support these statements, in my opinion. I think you need also to emphasize on the research gaps. And this means basically that clearly you need to clearly state the research gap or problem that your research addresses. This is extremely crucial aspects of justifying the study importance. Again, as I mentioned in the title section, you need to seek feedback, you need to revise and edit, and again, you also need to align it with the journal guidelines. In my opinion, I think a well-crafted introduction sets the stage for the rest of your manuscript, making it essential to capture the reader's interest and convey the significance of your research. Taking the time to refine your introduction, in my opinion, can significantly improve the chances of your manuscript being accepted for publication ultimately. Now, moving to the discussion section, similar to what we've been discussing in the introduction section, I think you also need to be clear in the method section. In my opinion, you need to write the method section in a clear and concise manner. You need to avoid ambiguity or jargon in your method section. It has to be well structured, and you need to organize the sections logically using subheadings whenever applicable, such as study design, data collection, data analysis, and so on and so forth. You need to be detail oriented. You need to be able to provide a thorough and detailed account of the research methods, allowing others to replicate your study in the future. Also, you need to work in a chronological orders. You need to describe the methods in the order they will be performed, making it easy for the readers to follow, and it's going to be extrapolated into your results section. You also need to not to forget the ethical consideration into your that goes into your method section, which basically in which you need to explain the any ethical approvals, consent, and adherence to ethical guidelines. You also need to provide some description about the instrument and the materials. You need to list the specific instruments, tools, and materials that has been used in your study. You need to provide detailed information about the study participant when it comes to the sample description, including their inclusion and exclusion criteria. Following this, you need to appropriately describe how data were collected, including the data sources, measurements, and the procedures that were used to collect these data. Finally, I think one of the most important aspects about any method section is the statistical analysis. I think you need to explain the statistical methods in which you employed for data analysis, including software and significant levels. Quality control is extremely important also to be mentioned in this section. And you also need to be clear, concise, and as I mentioned in the previous section, you need to seek feedback and you need to comply with the journal guidelines and formatting requirements. And as I mentioned in the previous section, I think when it comes to the method section, a well-documented and transparent method section is extremely essential, in my opinion, uh, for the credibility of your research. Providing a detailed account of your methodology extremely help increasing your chances for your manuscripts to be accepted for publication. Now, moving to the result section of your manuscript. And in order to reduce the disk rejection, you need to consider these aspects. Yeah, the first thing, again, the clarity. You need to present your results in a clear and organized manner. You need to avoid complex and convoluted languages. You need to be structured. You need to organize the results logically, typically following the same orders that your research question or hypothesis. You need to ensure that you begin with the key findings. You need to begin with a concise summary of the most significant or interesting findings to capture the reader's attention. You need to utilize appropriate figures and tables to visually represent your data, making it easier for the readers to interpret them. And I will give you some examples in the next few slides. Interpretation. You need you need to avoid including interpretation or discussion of your results in this section. You need to focus solely on presenting these data and leave the interpretation for these results into the discussion section. You need to provide sufficient details for the readers to understand the results, including measures of central tendency, variability, and significance. And whenever it's feasible, you need to use subheadings to separate different aspects of the results, particularly if the section is extremely lengthy. You need to avoid repeating yourself. You need to be extremely clear in your labels. And as I mentioned, you need to ultimately and always seek feedback, and you need to comply with the formatting requirement. Again, I think a well-structured and transparent results section is extremely essential to conveying the outcomes of your research accurately and can contribute to the success of your manuscript to be accepted for publication. Using figures and tables for efficiency and clarity is I think it's a double-edged sword, and using tables and figures in research, as I mentioned, could serve as a double-edged sword and offering benefits, but also might present some challenges. And here's my reflection on why incorporating tables and figures can be both advantageous and potentially problematic in the research project cycle. I think as an advantage, I think it using tables or figures usually enhance the presentation of your data. Usually, tables and figures provide visual representation of data and making complex information more accessible and easier to be understood. And you need to use tables and figures to present key findings, trends, and patterns in a concise and visually appealing manner. The second advantage of using figures and table is basically improving the readability. Usually, visual elements break up long blocks of text, improving the overall readability of your manuscript. The third aspect about the advantages is basically an efficient way of communication and can effectively convey large amount of information, helping researchers communicate the results more effectively. It might support our interpretation for our finding. Usually, these visual aids can support the interpretation of the results and help readers grasp the significance of your findings. But again, it has some drawbacks and challenges, and I think one of the major challenges is basically you're risking overloading information. Sometimes tables and figures can overwhelm readers if not used just carefully, leading to cognitive overload. The second thing is basically the complexity and misinterpretation. Usually, complex visuals may be misinterpreted and may lead to inaccuracies in our understanding. The third challenge is basically the space limitation. Usually, journals have restriction on the number and the size of tables and figures. This might impact the researcher's ability to present all relevant data visually. The following issues basically the accessibility issues. Usually, tables and figures may pose accessibility challenge for individuals with visual impairment, and the last thing that I would like to reflect on the challenges when it comes to using figures and tables is basically the consistency and formatting. Usually ensuring consistent formatting and style across tables and figures can be extremely challenging. So, in conclusion to this idea, I think while tables and figures are valuable tools for enhancing the presentation of research findings, I think researchers must use them carefully and thoughtfully. Striking the right balance ensures that the visual contributes positively to the overall impact and understanding of the research. Now, let me give you an example. This table on the right, you could tell that it doesn't need a table to be to be presented. This could be presented in a simple paragraph. While in the paragraph on the left hand, as guys can see, I think it needs a table in order to be extreme more appealing and to be understood in a proper way. So this is just to give you an example about what we're looking for in in the tables and figures section. Finally, let's tackle the discussion and conclusion. And in this final sections, you should clearly explain why your work, how your work advances the field of the study. I think you should take care not to simply repeat the experimental results. You should rather indicate uses, extension, or application of the work, but do not overreach or hence a statement such as this method can potentially be used do not belong to the conclusion. I think you need to discuss and interpret and provide an adequate interpretation of your result section in the discussion section and try as much as possible to compare and contrast with the current literature. The conclusion should also be distinct from the abstract, should be distinct from the rest of your manuscript, and they serve as a different purpose, although the same messages sometimes may be included in both sections. So I hope with that I was able to provide you with some aspects when it comes to the your some aspects when it comes to your drafting your manuscript. So my final thought is basically you need to search the publisher engines before you craft or you draft your manuscript. This is my first thing to do, and this is the thing that I usually encourage my fellow researchers to do. And usually I start with searching the journal engine in order to find the matching journal that fits the scope of my manuscript. Then I get to draft my manuscript based on their guides for authors. And you need to make sure that you follow the same structure that they provide you with. You need to structure your paper according to to their guidelines and not to yours. Personally, my first thing to do is basically is to go over the guidelines for any biomedical journals, and I draft my manuscripts from the beginning based on their requirements at the front end. Finally, I cannot emphasize the importance of proofreading. I think proofreading is a critical aspect of the research project cycle, and that can often occurs in the later stages of the manuscript preparation. But I think this process involves a meticulous review of the document to identify and correct errors grammar, spelling, punctuation, formatting, and overall writing style. I think reflecting on proofreading effort in the research project cycle several consideration has to be taken into account. You're not just proofreading just to make sure that you don't have any grammar or spelling mistakes. You are proofreading to make sure that you've conducted a quality assurance. Proofreading is a quality assurance step that ensures the final manuscript is free from errors, enhancing the overall professionalism and credibility of your research. I think also it provides a clarity and coherence. I think clear and coherent writing is essential for effectively communicating research findings, and proofreading helps eliminating unnecessary informations and ensures that the manuscript flows logically. The third thing is basically the consistency. Consistency in formatting, language use, and citation size is crucial for a polished manuscript. And I think proofreading helps identify and rectify any inconsistencies in these aspects. The following thing is basically the grammar and the syntax that you're using. Poor grammar and syntax can detract from the clarity and impact your research negatively. And I think proofreading allows for the identification and correction of these grammatical errors in at the beginnings. You also with proofreading, you can catch and rectify typos and spelling mistakes. And finally, I think one of the most important aspects about proofreading is basically the reader's perspectives. Take it into account the reader's perspectives. And as a reflection on this point, I think proofreadings allow researchers to adopt the perspective of the readers encountering the manuscript for the first time. This helps in identifying areas that might be confusing or unclear to some of the readers. And finally, I think proofreading is not just about catching typos. I think it's a strategic effort to refine and elevate the quality of your research manuscript. I think by investing time and attention in this stage of the research project cycle, I think you as a researchers contribute to the overall professionalism and impact and success of your work. Finally, let me provide you with my final thoughts. These are basically some useful resources that I relied on, and I provide them for my mentees and my students usually whenever they start the journey of conducting research. I think they're extremely helpful, and they will provide you with more and more in-depth insights on how to draft your manuscripts appropriately in the future. Now, my final thoughts in this presentation, I think let me give you a small story about myself. My first paper was rejected 7 times before it was accepted. So you need to be patient, as I mentioned in the earlier sections. But with each rejection that I received, I think uh, it added a lot to my scientific research knowledge. And I took each of these rejection lightly, and I tried as much as possible to absorb the amount of effort that has been spent by the reviewers on these comments, and I tried as much as possible to reflect positively on my revised manuscript. So my advice to you as a young generation or as a young generation or whoever is trying to submit a manuscript in the near future, you need to take it easy. You need to enjoy the ride. Don't feel overwhelmed. And honestly, you don't need to prejudge your work or your capabilities based on these opinions. By the end of the day, these are human being opinions. So you need to each one of us has different opinion based on our previous experiences. The key word here is persistence. You need to be extremely persistent whenever you conduct any of these research projects, and you need to have an added value on your research. It's not about how much you publish as much as it's about how good you are publishing. So again, I would remind you that you need to be patient. Finally, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to provide you with certain tips to avoid this rejection. Here's my email if you would like to reach out to me. And thank you so much and have a great day.